Welcome to a guide to every deck in EDH, and today we are looking at Neheb the Eternal. This is a mono red commander. It's 5 mana, it's a 4/6. It's got Afflict 3, which is whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. And then it says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you add a red mana for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So the main idea here is going to be that we want to have a all-encompassing damage effect, so something that damages all players or all opponents equally to a large degree, so that on our post-combat main we can add a ton of red mana to our pool and then use that red mana to dump into either a combo or just big payoff spells to win. So first of all, we've got our card draw, which is going to include the Backside of Birgi, Harnfell, Horn of Bounty. We've got Chandra, Torch of Defiance, which has multiple relevant modes. It's got add double red. It's got deal 4 to a creature, and then importantly, it's got exile the top card of your library. You may cast it, and if you don't, each opponent, you deal 2 damage to each opponent. So it's either a pseudo card draw spell and the ability to impulse draw the top card every turn, or if we choose not to impulse draw that card, we then deal 2 to each opponent, which is 6 damage for Neheb, so we generate 6 mana on our post-combat main. We've got Jeska's Will, and then the usual suspects that you would think of: One Ring, War Room, Wheel of Fortune, but importantly, Nullspine Dragon, a 7 mana 7/5 flyer, and it says when it enters the battlefield, you may discard your hand and draw cards equal to the damage dealt to target opponent this turn. So if we're dealing a sufficient amount of damage, we're going to generate a lot of mana with Neheb, and then we can use that mana to pay into Nullspine Dragon and draw a bunch more cards. And one of the things with Neheb is that under certain conditions, we can generate a lot of mana. Like some of these are just generating us like 6 mana with Chandra, for example, but in a lot of cases, we're going to be able to generate like 14, 20, 30 mana with Neheb. So then we've got our one straight up combo card in Aggravated Assault. If we dealt 5 total damage to our opponents, that means on the post-combat main, we get to generate 5 mana with Neheb. So as long as we can generate exactly enough or more than however much it costs to activate Aggravated Assault, we can take infinite combat steps, because we're going to keep going to combat and then keep going to post-combat main phases, which will keep triggering Neheb. So this will always have enough mana to keep paying for Aggravated Assault. Then we've got our counter spells, which of course include the Red Blast, but it also includes Tybalt's Trickery and Burnout, which specifically counters blue spell or blue instants. And then we've got, of course, our fast mana, because we want to get Neheb out as quickly as possible, which is basically just every form of fast mana that we can envision. We've got Haste from Generator Servant and Lightning Greaves, which is relevant for letting Neheb attack immediately. Similarly, we've got, pretty stock standard red lands here. Shatterskull Smashing can occasionally be a payoff for all the red mana that we're generating off Neheb, but it cannot go to players' faces. So it's just going to be a way to kill creatures sometimes, but mostly it's just in here as a red land that doesn't cost us much. Then we've got Protection. Again, we can't have our Neheb getting killed, so we've got Bolt Bend and Ricochet Trap as 1 mana ways of protecting Neheb, along with Deflecting Swap being free. We've got Lightning Greaves, Defense Grid, and Conqueror's Flail. As long as the equipped creature, the flail is attached to a creature, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. So it is the equipment version of Grand Abolisher. And then lastly over here, Price of Glory. Whenever a player taps a land for mana during another player's turn, destroy that land. So it isn't straight up protection, and that our opponents still do have the option of casting instants into us, but this does punish them severely for doing so. Then, of course, we obviously also want a bunch of ramp in addition to our fast mana. A little bit of removal, like Wild Magic Surge. Some stacks effects that we can play, of course. We've got the Blood Moons, we've got Cursed Totem, and we've got Ruination, destroy all non-basic lands. We are playing a sizable amount of basic mountains, and even if we weren't, we can still generate tons of mana off of Neheb anyway. We've got some sweepers, some of which are going to double as damage enablers. Earthquake, Flame Break, Rolling Earthquake, Slag Storm. And then lastly, for when we do create a ton of mana, we've got 2 different payoffs. We've got Crackle with Power, XXX Red, deal 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So with sufficient amounts of mana, we can just blow away all of our opponents. Similarly, Inferno of the Star Mounts, 6 mana, 6/6, can't be countered, Flying Haste, and it's got Fire Breathing. And then when you get it up to 20 power, it deals 20 damage to any target. So it alone, first of all, is kind of an enabler, because if you just pay 6 for this, it is a 6/6 uncounterable haste flyer, so it should be able to deal 6 to an opponent to net us at least 6 mana. But when we have tons and tons of mana from Neheb, we can just dump all of that into Inferno of the Star Mounts as a way to kill our opponents. And then lastly, there is of course the damage enablers. So we've already been over Chandra, but some of the other ones are going to be acidic soil, deal 1 damage to each player for each land they control. So at a certain point in the game, this is going to add up to a lot. Like, let's say, even if our opponents just have 4 lands apiece, this is right away 12 damage right off the bat. So that's 12 mana from Neheb. Then cards like Earthquake and Rolling Earthquake are going to be however much we can pay for them. Of course, we don't want to kill our own Neheb, but we can at least pay X as 5, and Neheb will still survive that at 6 toughness. So if we're willing to pay up to 6 mana, we can still generate a total of 15 mana off of Neheb afterwards. And of course, these are both scalable and kill a bunch of the creatures in play as in addition to whatever else we're doing. Then we've got the spells that trigger a bunch. So Fiery Inscription, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, deals 2 damage to each opponent. Gutter Snipe does the same thing. So with enough instants or sorceries, especially a bunch of fast mana spells that we can chain together, we can potentially deal a ton of damage. So even just 1 trigger off of a Fiery Inscription or a Gutter Snipe is already 6 damage. Any more than that is 12, and then that starts getting Neheb up to ridiculous amounts of mana. We've got Flame Rift, which is 4 damage to each player, so this alone is 2 mana to generate 12 mana. Similarly, Flame Break, deal 3 to each creature without flying in each player. So that alone is going to be 3 to each player, so that's 9 mana off Neheb. Sizzle is just deal 3 damage to each opponent, so again, 9 for Neheb. Slag Storm is either 3 to each creature or 3 to each player, so you can either use it as a small sweeper or as a way to generate 9 from Neheb. And then Price of Progress, again, most players play mostly non-basic lands nowadays, which means it depends on how many lands there are in play, but this is going to deal a ridiculous amount of damage and then generate a ton of mana off of Neheb. We've of course got Heartless Hidetsugu. Each player, it deals damage to each player equal to half their life total. So this here, if you've got it enabled, is going to be a ridiculous amount. This is going to be in the like 50 to 60 mana range. And the main downside to it is, of course, that it is 5 mana and that it's a creature, so you have to wait to tap it. And then lastly, we've got Ketis. Whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. So if we have Ketis in play, then when Neheb deals 4 damage to an opponent, it deals 4 damage to each other opponent. So this is basically 2 mana for, again, 12. So all of these damage enablers are going to combine with Neheb to either just auto win the game with Aggravated Assault combo, or it's going to be used in combination with various draw power to like draw into more stuff, or just land a win con in something like an Inferno of the Star Mounts or a Crackle with power. So again, main strategy, ramp and fast mana your way into Neheb, use a damage enabler to make Neheb generate tons of mana, use that mana to cast draw spells until eventually you find a combo or a giant damage output. And that is Neheb the Eternal.